Welcome back to the Bob Davis Podcast YouTube channel. If you have subscribed, thank you. We are still, getting a few subscriptions here and there and still growing. And thank you for watching. And thank you also for clicking through to thebobdavispodcast.com. I do audio podcasts and then I do a video after the audio podcast. And all of it is different content. I don't just put the podcast up on YouTube. I actually will talk about the subject matter kind of as an after show thing. So if you want to hear the show, you want to hear the audio podcast, you go to thebobdavispodcast.com, you go to Spotify, you go to Google Podcasts while they last, or you can get the Bob Davis Podcast at iTunes. You can subscribe at iTunes and listen to the audio podcast at iTunes. So we'll get all that out of the way so you know what's going on. And I do appreciate the subscriptions and the likes and the shares. I just don't always say that because, I sometimes people on YouTube, it gets very repetitious with all the things that people say to get people to subscribe and do all the things. So you do what you do and I'll do what I do. How's that? I just finished a podcast, and usually what I'll do is I'll do a podcast and then jump on YouTube and just kind of review the content and do a little bit more, because there's always things that you remember when you do an audio podcast. There's always things that you remember, or the content is slightly different. So that's what I'm doing in these podcasts. And again, welcome. I just finished a podcast called Still Captivated by Nomad Life. The reason is I've been doing some Nomad Life podcasts. The most recent one is Nomad Life Over? And the reason that I did that was because we noticed out here in Quartzsite a little bit of a reduction in the number of nomads. There was some sparse attendance to some of the sort of nomad meetups, and I'm not the only person that's now asking this question. I take a little bit different view of things. I don't look at it in terms of the nomad lore, or what kind of batteries you're using, or what kind of rig you have, or any of that kind of stuff. I kind of take a different view of the whole nomad life thing, because as a nomad myself, I go through a lot of changes psychologically and just life on the road, and that's kind of what I concentrate on in both the podcast as well as on YouTube. Certainly there are other things that I talk about, and when I get into this sort of rut of the same kind of content, what I will do is I'll just say, okay, this is going to end up being a series. So this one is entitled Still Captivated by Nomad Life, and the story behind it is, I wouldn't say that I was depressed. I was just saying that it felt like the bloom was off the rose as it pertained to this idea of working on the road, running businesses on the road, being an RV entrepreneur, let's say, and sort of having the freedom to go and do what you want to do, where you want to do it, and how you want to do it, which is the big attraction of nomad life, generally speaking. So that kind of just was, I put that out, and I got a note from my friend who fills in occasionally. He produces a syndicated talk show, and he filled in on the show with the other hosts. So when one of the two hosts on this show are gone, Max, who's the producer, fills in. And he was on the show with one of the hosts, and they were talking for about 8.5 minutes about nomad life, and the subject was me, so it was pretty compelling. So what I did was I took this little piece from this radio show and put it into a podcast, and then I talk on either side of it because it provoked, or it triggered a lot of thoughts on my part about this concept of nomad life and how captivating it can be. Because and the reason I did it this way and said still captivated by nomad life is because it's kind of the other side of the story when it comes to, is nomad life over? Because when I listened to this little clip of audio from the Bob and Sherry show, I was kind of taken aback by the level of interest and the intensity of interest in this life, nomad life, where Bob/Max, his name is Bob. I've known him since I was 19, and he's known me since he was about 18. So we have been friends for a long, long time. So I call him Bob. His name's Bob Sweeten, but on the air he's known as Max. they kind of told my whole story about selling everything and going out on the road permanently. And I often talk about how I took this truck all over the country for 10 years before in 2020 I decided I don't know why I'm coming home, so I got rid of everything and I went out on the road. And I've told that story a bunch of times, both on YouTube and also in the podcast, so I don't need to belabor that. But they told that whole story, and both of them were just taken aback by the fact that I support what I do through advertising on the audio podcast. And also people will send money. Now, they don't send a ton of money. I don't ask for a ton of money. And I don't want to be known as a guy who's doing this to get money, because that's not at all what it means. But Bob was saying how people today really do want to help. They want to support someone doing something like doing Nomad Life, let's say, or doing something that they think is very interesting. He told some other stories. He has a dog that needed surgery, and they did a GoFundMe for the dog, and they got tons of money for the dog. They paid for the operation, and the dog is fine. So if you're wondering, so is Nomad Life still captivating to a part of the country? And that's really the question in terms of what I think about and how I think about it, and what I talk about in the podcast and on the YouTube channel. And as I mentioned at the end of Is Nomad Life Over, I think there's a lot of technology that's getting better and better and better, both in terms of rigs, in terms of solar, in terms of audio equipment, video equipment, and internet, in terms of being able to upload, in terms of working on the road, in terms of running businesses on the road. And there's definitely in the future, there are going to be some changes in how we work, what we work at, where we work, when we work, and how efficient we are when we work. So these are all things that are impacted by various kinds of technology developments. And it really isn't just, let's say, AI. It's also just improvements in the way that cell signals are sent and received, or the speed with which you can upload audio files. I will tell you, just audio files, let alone video, which takes a lot more bandwidth. But uploading audio files, when I first started, it was I started in my car traveling around the country doing podcasts, and I would have to go to truck stops, go in the restaurants, plug in my computer, get on their Wi-Fi if they had it, and upload my audio. And it often took quite a while. So in order to get a podcast done at that time, sometimes it would take 5, 6, 7 hours from the time that you actually produced the podcast to being able to send it up, because it was very, internet service was very spotty, even when you went into someplace. Now it's not a problem at all. Almost anywhere you can use a hotspot at the very least, and often you can use Wi-Fi, and if you have Starlink, it's a lot faster. So this is what I mean by the technology is improving and changing. Part of the reason I think it feels like the bloom is off the Nomad Rose here in Quartzsite, in terms of people coming, is very simply that people are being compelled by companies to come back to work. So the work site demands employees, and they don't want to go back to the work site. There's a resistance to it. I mentioned in the previous video, IBM, I think it was IBM, that said you have to come in at least 3 days a week if you're in management, or hit the road. We're done with you. So people are being compelled to go back to work, so they really can't work from anywhere. In the past 3-4 years, just with the pandemic, I noticed there were so many people working on the road, running businesses from the road, and it seemed to be all the rage. That seems to be changed a little bit in the last few months as people are being compelled to go back to work. Now, I don't know how long this is going to go. Obviously, if people start losing their jobs because of the economy, not that the economy, I'm not going to sit here. I don't want to get into a long conversation about the economy and whether the economy is doing well or not doing well, largely because most people take it as a political conversation, which it is not. It's an economic conversation. We may see more people who are out on the road. I sit here and I continue to see the rents increasing and housing costs increasing, and I wonder how people can do it. especially younger people. So when you don't expose yourself to those kinds of costs because you're doing what, the nomad life, your costs are essentially firewood and fuel and food. We don't have those kinds of problems because we are not exposing ourselves to shelter, if you will, inflation. If people start losing their jobs and shelter becomes an issue, I think you'll see more people deciding to come out. I don't necessarily want it to be that way. I think people, I would like to see people come out because they are interested in living this way and interested in what kind of a lifestyle they can have, and would like to be more intentional about what they're doing. So these are the things that I talked about in this most recent podcast, available at thebobdavispodcast.com, and it's podcast 1130. It's called Still Captivated by Nomad Life. All you have to do is go to thebobdavispodcast.com, click on it, and you can listen to it. Depending on where you are, you might have some issues with getting the file, or if you're in a place where you don't have real good cell service, or you can get it on Spotify or Google Podcasts or a lot of other places, Stitcher.com, if it's still around, and lots of these other podcast aggregators, Podbean, and so forth. And it's kind of a detailed conversation about my surprise, due to the really the quaintness of a radio show and the people on the radio show being interested in really interested in this lifestyle, that I realized that there really is something to this, and I feel a lot better about it because my interest in nomad life has not waned, and I'm not going to stop. I'm still captivated by the idea of travel. I'm getting ready to head over to Florida from Arizona, so in the near future I'm going to be doing a lot more travel videos and doing a lot more shorts as well as I travel. And I think that'll be interesting. I feel better when I am moving. I feel better when the wheels are turning. I feel better when I'm traveling. I get a little antsy when I have to sit. And because of inflation, although it's not as bad as it used to be, but because of elevated fuel and food prices, we tend to decide to stay in one place a little longer than we did 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago when I first started. I went back and forth across the country 2 or 3 different times, up and down, back and forth, in the initial phases of my nomad life before I moved out of my duplex and got rid of everything. And even then, the first year was almost a frenetic effort to go and see all the lower 48 and to just have this incredible nomad experience. It came to an end when we started to see this inflation in 2021 and 22, and what you ended up doing was coming down here for 6 months or 7 months and then going back home for 6 or 7 months. So last summer I spent on the shores of a lake in Wisconsin and then came down here. This year I'm going to head east to go to Florida, going up through Virginia because we still have to clean up my mom's storage area after she passed away. And then I'm going back up to Wisconsin circuitously, and I'll be talking about that as I go. One of the great things about nomad life is that you get to decide when you're going to go, how you're going to go, generally speaking. And when you support yourself with something like a podcast or a YouTube channel, your time is your own. You do tend to work. People say, well, you're not doing anything. Well, no, I am doing stuff because I have to think about what I'm going to do, and I have to plan for what I'm going to do, and that's work. So it definitely qualifies. There are people running businesses doing this as well. So I hope there's more in the future because it is a great life, and it is not easy. I've often talked about how nomad life is not always all it's cracked up to be. We have some pretty tough days. When we watched a guy, if you go to Dark Nomad, you'll see it in our campground yesterday. He pulled his Class C up, which is a type of camper. It's the kind that has a truck, and it's kind of looks like the ambulance, except it's a camper. And he pulled his truck up, and there was steam coming out of the engine compartment. We were watching him, and he didn't open up the hood, and I don't know what was going on, but pretty soon you saw a little lick of flame, okay? And Robert ran out with his phone and started videoing so that people could see it. Within 7 minutes, this guy's camper was completely engulfed in flames and literally was destroyed. Ammunition cooking off, and if that's all on the Dark Nomad's video. So it's DARQ Dark Nomad at YouTube. If you want to see this thing burn, he got most of it, and 7 minutes it took. So we have difficult days, and you have to really think about, I mean, the first thing we all did was go try to figure out, hey, I want to make sure I know where my fire extinguisher is. I don't think he had a fire extinguisher. Stuff like that you think, oh, I don't need that, or I forgot it, or it doesn't work, or whatever. And suddenly you've got a huge problem. 2 years ago, I watched somebody's side-by-side burn in literally 5 minutes. It was completely, there was nothing left. The frame was gone, everything. It was just a dark spot on the ground. So we had bad days. We also have good days, and we have moments of there are sublime moments in travel that I wouldn't trade for anything. Most of them I keep to myself. I don't share them in a video, but we have sublime moments traveling, and I think that's one of the reasons that we continue to do it. So I'm getting ready to travel again. I'm really, really excited. I'm going to go through the maps, and I'll do a podcast about that and figure out which route I'm going to take. But of course, I'm going south along the border, through New Mexico, through Texas, over onto the Redneck Riviera, all the way over to Florida. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Trying to make these videos a little shorter. I don't need to go into too much detail, but I wanted to update everybody on the latest podcasts, which are, well, the latest podcast is Still Captivated by Nomad Life. It's available at thebobdavispodcast.com. People say I watch YouTube. I don't listen to podcasts, but some people do, and I really appreciate you guys clicking over and listening to the podcast and subscribing on iTunes. And thanks for the subscriptions and the support and the views and the likes and the comments as well here on YouTube. Bye-bye.